Hi, I'm George. Welcome to GMakes, and this is my node overview for November 2022, days 11 and 12, Brutal Machinery. And this might be my favorite render so far that I've come up with and made. I really love this one. I had a lot of fun making it. This overview might be a little bit on the longer side, just because there's a lot of parts moving. And I might eventually do more of a tutorial for this kind of thing, because I really like a lot of the ideas in here. So if you are watching this and you want to see a tutorial, make sure to leave a comment below, and also make sure to subscribe so you catch that tutorial. But let's get right into it. So you can see the render. It's this saw blade that's like cutting through the default cube, and then it's like an assembly line. Perfect loop. Love that. And my original idea was, yeah, something with a saw. I originally thought like a whole bunch of saws like flashing into frame and then flashing out. And then I just slowly evolved into this idea on the conveyor belt. So we're going to start just at the beginning, kind of building this out again. So first things first is we have a curved line. I'm actually going to also just hide. I'm going to switch some things around. I'm going to go here because I'm going to hide my lights because I got a lot of lights in here. So that is going to block in the viewport. So we start with a line. And that's not very interesting, is it? Just a plain old line. But what this line it does is it gets resampled and used to create that arm. So you can see that I have that called the bicep, and that is because if we go all the way over here to a curve to mesh, we start to see the formation of it. So let's look at first the forearm. So again, nothing much happening because it's just a lot of curves. I'm really happy with how this animation system actually works out. So let me try to explain that. So we have a bicep. It's just a line. All right. And then that line is transformed to where I want it. And also the rotation, I have that controlled. I have that keyframed, but that's controlled by this value. And then that line, that geometry gets reversed. So flipped around, resampled to just one point on it. And then that single point line with a single point, which again is that middle joint, the elbow joint. So that's the bicep, and then this is the elbow joint. That is then brought down to this forearm, which then is an instance on points. So again, we have that one single point, which is where the elbow joint is. Another curved line is instanced onto that joint, and that's what this one is. And that again is rotated with keyframes as value into the rotation. And then that instance on points is then split up and used for pretty much everything else. So, and that is how we get, not those, this arm right here, this main bit of the arm. So that forearm, also then, that forearm bit after the elbow is going down and then again, reversed, resampled, and used to put this saw blade onto it. So we can see that this is the saw blade. And this saw blade is pretty straightforward. This is also why I want to do this, because it's pretty easy to make a saw blade in Blender. You just take a curved star, and then you just make it look like a saw blade. So you do it. So I have this as 32 points, 1 meter, outer radius slightly larger, and then I have it twisted a bit. You can, again, geometry node, so you can mess with any of these. You can make it more or less twisted. If you have it turned the other way, you can change it. You can make it fewer points. You can make it more points. Whatever you want to do. Make it look like Sonic if you want. But anyway, I have that set to scene time for the spinning. And then I have that value, all that jazz. So I actually just go here. You can see it spins because I have it the frames is what controls this. This isn't keyframe. This is using the frame values to spin. And then I just have it as a fill curve to give us all that geometry, just a fill curve, and then transform against that material. So that's on the end of the forearm. And then also on the arms, again, we have this elbow joint. So again, using the original bicep, again, the same elbow point. We have a cylinder that then gets instance on points to make this elbow joint. And we'll get to that a little bit too when we get to texturing. And then, again, using this whole forearm bit, it's a lot of back and forth. Again, it's a pretty big tree. We have this saw bolt that I want in the middle of the saw blade. because I was like, how does that thing attach? So I added this little saw bolt, which is just right here. And that's just another, again, resampling the curve to use it as a single point. And that's just a cone that gets transformed and then instance on that point. And then that all goes. We also have all these things going on here to get sparks. This is something I'm going to talk about in a little bit. I'm not going to hit right now because we're going to focus on how we got the actual arm. Yes, the actual arm bit. So how do we get the actual arm bit? Well, pretty straightforward. We have both the forearm and the bicep coming up here to be turned into a curve to mesh. That's it. So the bicep, we just have going straight into a join geometry and just set straight curve to mesh. The other one, the forearm right here, the forearm bit, is I wanted that to narrow a bit as it got towards the saw blade, towards the hand. So I set the curve radius. We'll actually go back to this. So that we set the curve radius, and we use, again, a length into, I use an arctan to just control where that goes, and then the scale as well. And then that's that. Pretty straightforward. And the curve circle is what we use to create that as that radius. And this joint is, again, hidden up by this circle joint, so we don't have to worry about that. And then that all joins up down here. And then I just animated it. So we see if I click on this, and then if I go to like one of these values, you can see all of my little keyframes. And the nice thing is that if you move this bottom one, the bicep, it will move it's not quite like IK or anything, but it will move with it because it's instance on the end point. As you move the bicep, it will move the forearm, and then you can move the forearm, but it won't move the bicep. So again, not like IK, but still a nice way to go about it and pretty straightforward. And then I just animated it with some, just having fun. I'm not truly an animator, but I know some of like the basics and I want to practice it. So I like this idea of as it goes forward, the saw blade kind of revs up, like a little personality revs up and then just like slams into it, but takes a while before it can truly get all the way through and pushes it down. So while we're still on the saw blade, let's talk about these sparks. So as I kind of finished it, I was like, it needs some sparks. It needs some life. Because, you know, it was nice, but it didn't quite look like it was actually cutting through anything. And this wasn't like a laser, so it needed something to like resist. And I didn't want to use a particle system or anything. So the solution I came up with is just a bunch of lines. I mean, with motion blur, sparks become lines anyways. So that's why I have, it's actually on this, again, this saw bolt right here in the middle. You can see I distributed a whole bunch of points on that thing. And then I just basically translated them down. So I transformed them down to match the curve of the blade and like where I wanted them to go. And that's just a line again, and it has an emission material on it. And then I set the curve radius, curve to mesh, and that's a curved circle, and then setting the material, and you get these sparks. So you can see that's just the sparks. And then you can see though that they fade into existence kind of, and then they go, and then they fade out. So first things first, to get this look, like I had the rotation set to a random value, kind of mess around with how that looks. So you can see like that's giving me this. That's how I got that like splayed out bit. And then I have the random value also for the scale, specifically really like the Z value or the X, like is kind of all of them. Because, you know, sparks are different sizes, but it's really controlling the length. And then that's set to a multiply. So, and that is controlled by a scene. That is just controlled by the frame, because I was like, these don't really need much to change. So that's just the scene. But how they start and how they end is kind of what I used in, which one was it? Was it the, it was the Futuristic Garden render. I like that method. So again, I have all these multiplies. So multiply is setting how long this takes, basically the speed at which this goes. So you can see it takes that amount of frames, basically is what I'm saying. And then I subtract, that's where I want it to start. So again, it starts at frame 44, 0, and then suddenly 45 is 1. And then it ends at 65, or it ends not at 65, but it ends when that finishes. So, and that's what this ping pong's kind of doing. If I get rid of this ping pong, you can see it's just going to keep on going. But this ping pong says after it starts, so again, I'm subtracting 44 from the scene, from the frame value. So it really starts at negative 44. So I'm saying at 15 frames, so if we have to subtract 44, 40, so I'm saying it starts here, 45 really, and then you can see it goes until 85. Ish. So 30. Yeah, the math gets a little weird, but basically this ping pong, because I also want it to fade out as it goes down. So yeah, that makes sense. So really 44, because this is really 20 frames and this lasts about 40 frames. Yeah, I don't know why I was getting confused by math. It's pretty straightforward. So it starts at frame 44, 45, because the next frame, and then it goes for 40 frames. So 85 is when it's done. 86 is when it's completely done, but 85 is the last frame of it. And then what happens is that it goes, and in the middle there, so 20 frames, so it's about 65, that's at its apex, and then it hits that ping pong value, so it starts going back down and lessening back down. So it basically goes boo, boo, and then that's how we get that look of it cutting through and then it stopping to cut through because it's finishing its curve. It's finishing like the arc of the cut. And that's it. Pretty straightforward when I actually remember how to think. And again, that looks, I can get rid of that. That looks combined with everything, looks like that. So again, coming through, cutting, and then disappearing. Pretty fun. I really like it. I was really happy with it. So that's the gist of the arm and the saw blade and everything. Everything else is pretty straightforward. The only complex thing, because what's the simple stuff? We got a conveyor belt right here. So that's pretty straightforward. That's just a bunch of, that's just a cube that I also added some cylinders to on the ends of it. They connect, transform, looks like this. The actual animation of it, all a texture. Then added another, excuse me. I added another cylinder after it, so we get these two, so we get like the actual conveyor belt, which has the texture, and then we get like the thing holding the conveyor belt. Pretty straightforward. Nothing too complex. The curve's a little complex, we'll get to that. Then I just a platform, just a cube, with this little thing. That one's a little interesting because it's just a boolean, a mesh boolean on a sphere. But yeah, nothing too complex there. Those two join together to make the platform with the conveyor belt. Now, the main thing that you might be wondering is how we got this cut cube. I mean, look at this. It's a normal cube, and then it splits in two. You know, simple, normal stuff. That is actually a little troubleshooting, but pretty straightforward. So it's actually a grid. And that grid is transformed and extruded because that's how we get that emptiness. I wanted it to be empty. I want it to be like a hollow box. I think that's how cubes are in Blender usually, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want it to be a solid cube, but you could also add another cylinder, or you could actually just transform a normal cube. I suppose you could also, I guess, do that and delete one of the faces, but I wanted this one specifically because since it's a grid, it rotates on its axis. It rotates on that single edge. It's not in the middle. I have to change it a lot. In this transform, you can see I just put it, so now the origin point is right on that edge, and then you extrude it up. Now it's on the outside edge. So this extrusion again is like 0.5 because it's not the full 1 meter. And so that's on the outside edge. So that means when you transform this, when you rotate it, it's going to rotate. You can see here, it's going to rotate, if it will let me know. But if you rotate it, it rotates along. Looks like I got to do that. So if you rotate this, it rotates along that. It's already transformed that way, but it rotates along that value, or along this point right here on the outer edge. And that's what we want, because when you cut something, you have it together, and then it splits like that, but it's going to split on the farthest outside point. It's weird. So we just do that twice, basically. So we have two of these cubes, they get transformed, so that we have the origin points right there. And again, this is where they're turned down. So they start up, turn like that. And this, again, I just keyframed animated because it was just the easiest. But you can see as they split, they rotate along the outer edge. So there we go. I mean, that's it. That's how to make a cube. You can really do that with any shape, or you could do that with like a star. You can modify your starting base shape and then extrude it or whatever you want to do. But I like the default cube, and that was a nice little thing to give that little cut. So it cuts in half. Again, it's just frame animated. Pretty straightforward. Sorry. Some of it's frame animated. This last bit is. So when it falls, it moves and then it falls. That is frame animated. This actual cut is actually using these multiplies. Again, similar thing. Combine X, Y, Z. All that fun stuff just to get that cut going. Nothing too complex. Pretty much what I've been doing for this whole video and all my other renders. Anyway. The last thing for this before we get into slight texturing, nothing too complex on textures or even compositing. The last thing is this curve, and I'm actually also really happy with this curve. So you can see what happens at the end to get this to loop is that another cube just appears out of nowhere, goes yada yada yada, and then goes on the conveyor belt. So that's this. That's this cube. That's this curve. Boop, it appears and goes. So how that works is, again, pretty straightforward. So we have a Bezier segment, which actually is modeled to match more or less the geometry of that conveyor belt. So just a lot of tinkering, a lot of messing around with it. And then I have that curve to mesh as a quadrilateral. And then I also have it set shade smooth because it was shaded smooth. I didn't want that. But this quadrilateral is standing in for our default cube. Now, the main thing here, besides figuring out the right width and radius and all that stuff, is this trim curve. And that's being controlled by this value for this animation again. And so basically, the trim curve works by, let's cut these so we can actually see it. Not what I want to do. Got a lot of things going on here. So this trim curve, we just boop, cut that. And then you can see I have, so right here, curve radius is 0.3. So that's really 0.6 because it's the radius. So 0.6 is the diameter. So I have this trim curve set to a difference of 0.6. So this is 2. You can see this is just the curve going right here. I'll click it so we can see it. So this is just the curve. This is the start and end point of the curve. And I have that set to 2 and 2.6. So we get a length of 0.6. So when that is curved to mesh, it looks like that. It looks like the cube. Also, shade smooth again. It looks like the cube. So you can see we can control that end bit and that bit. So now we go ahead and I use a value, not frames, but a value set to there. And then I have that same value. So that value is 0, let's say, or let's see what we have that animate to. So it's, again, keyframes. There we go. So it just appears. But I wanted to always keep that consistent width of 0.6, that diameter. So I have another subtract value that's subtracting 0.6 into the start. So the start is always going to be 0.6 behind, when it can be, 0.6 behind the end value. So we always get that consistent diameter. And then I have another value for the scale, and that was just because as I reach the end of the curve, you can see it sticking behind the conveyor belt just slightly from the angle I had the camera. So I just set a scale, which is basically lets me know when it starts. We just go. And then I animate the values. So that's all working in tandem to create this curve, this little cube that pops up, and then pops up, and then sets a position, and then restarts the loop, essentially. And that's it. That is making this whole thing. That is this whole animation. This cut, you can see, sparks, again, are just lines, fun times. It breaks, and then I hand-animated this falling off. The transform is controlling that, and then the new cube pops up, and then it sets, and then it resets. So, again, pretty straightforward. I might do little tutorials here and there if people are interested. The last thing we're going to talk about is just some of the basic textures. Nothing too complex. The saw blade, we'll go into material mode. The saw blade, I was gonna make it a little rusty, but decided not to. So it has just a little bit of a Musgrave texture that's rotating. Nothing too complex. If we also look at the conveyor sides, again, this is just a noise texture being controlled. Same thing for this block. The block has a brick texture mixed into it as well, but nothing too complex. And there's a little bit of a bump to kind of give it that paint-esque texture. The only kind of complex thing is the conveyor belt itself, and that is also just basically a bump texture. So that is just, we'll look at this one. That is just a, there we go. That is just a bump texture. It's just a wave texture right here. With the bump, a bit of noise mixed in for that texture, a color ramp to control things, and the base color saying yes and no. So you can see we get that base color going. That's what it is. And then we add the bump into that, so we get the actual texture. And the animation for that is this maximum set to the, so it's the phase offset of the wave texture. Again, maximum to control the time, how fast it moves, and then I just animated that value with the frame hashtag or hashtag frame. So it's the frame value being used to control this animation. And then I just, yep, so that's it. That's pretty straightforward. The maximum is saying basically when it's going to start and when it's going to stop. Again, so if we look at frame 105, so nothing's happening. Frame 104, it starts moving. Yeah, so that's that. Pretty straightforward. Nothing too complex. So that's it. I'm gonna end it there because I could talk about this one forever. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I hope you like how it turned out. I think it's pretty cool, a lot of fun. And yeah, so that's it. That's been my node overview for Nodevember 2022 days 11 and 12. 11 and 12. Yeah, 11 and 12 brutal machinery. Yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you learn some things. I really like the sparks idea and also the cutting the cube in half, I think are really interesting. Also a little bit of animation for the arm of the actual saw. Hope you learned some stuff that you can use for your own renders. Hope you enjoyed this little overview. If you want to keep up to date with these overviews, I'm going to be making more of them, so make sure to subscribe so you stay updated. Also, feel free to check out any of my other tutorials, and I'll be posting more tutorials, of course, so subscribe for those. If you wanted to see what I'm making and see these renders as they more or less come out, you can follow me on Twitter at gmakes3d or Instagram at georgemakes3d. Twitter too, if you want to follow, have more behind the scenes works in progress besides final renders. Instagram will be focusing more on my actual final renders and things, but also some reels and stuff on there as well from what I'm working on. But that's it. So if you like this node overview, go ahead and like the video, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.